Still have our formalities.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We are learning Mishnah Shabbos, Perek Chaf Daled, chapter 24, Mishnah Gimel, Mishnah 3. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shlomo Rabinovich, Shlomo Asbas Rabbi Yaakov Eliezer. Okay. Ein oivsen es hagamol, v'loy darsin aval malitin. We are discussing now force feeding an animal. And the first case is force feeding a camel. Now, there's two ways or two amounts. Sometimes you force feed a camel, with a lot of food. For instance, let's say you're planning a trip through the desert, right? And they don't have rest stops for camels in the desert. So basically, you stuff this animal with a lot of food before you leave on the trip. And if, let's say, we're talking about a situation where, the animal you need it for a day's trip, you're going to force feed it with less. So the Mishnah says you cannot force feed it either a large amount or a small amount in a way that you're force feeding it to the point that you put it down the animal in a way that it can't come back. The animal can't bring it back up. And the reason for that is because, as we mentioned yesterday, the Chachamim forbade certain activities that involved significant effort on Shabbos. Doing this, force feeding the animal to the point that you have to put in the food in a way that the animal can't bring it back up, that's considered significant effort. And therefore, in the case of a camel, whether you're doing it a large amount, a small amount, both those manners, you cannot do it. Of a malitin. Malitin means, though, you could put food down its throat, which means you could kind of put the food down its throat in a way that if it wants to bring it back up, it's up to the animal. But putting the food in the animal in that manner doesn't take as much effort as the other way, and therefore that is permitted to do. Now, the next case, a similar case, the mamrim es hagolem of a malitin. You cannot fatten the calves through force feeding, again, in a way that you're putting the food down the animal in a way that it can't bring it back up. But if you put it in its throat, again, you're sticking the food into its throat, but it could bring it back up, then already the effort is not as significant, and therefore you would be able to do it on Shabbos. The same thing. You could put the food down the throat of the chickens, but you can put it in its throat in a way that if it wants to bring it up, it can bring it up. And in that way, that's not considered significant effort, and it's permitted to do. If you're going to put it down the chicken, it doesn't speak it out this way, but I'm assuming if, again, you put it down the chicken in a way that can't bring it back up, that's the same idea of the action that takes significant effort. The Chachamim said, even though you're feeding your animal to do that, you may not do it. Next, no more. This force feeding discussion is over. Next part of the discussion. The nice in mayim lemorsan, you can add water to the bran, which are pieces of grain husks used as animal food. Okay, so you add water to it. Now, typically, what do you do with this bran? You add water to it, and then you mix it. So the Mishnah says, "V'nais mayim lemorsan." You can add the water to the bran, but you cannot knead it. You cannot mix it together. Because the issue here is one of the prohibited activities on Shabbos is called lush, kneading. So if you go ahead and one of the 39 avos malachas is lush, kneading. Okay. And so when you just add the water to the bran, that's not called kneading it. Once you start mixing it and it mixes together, it starts forming, it starts forming like a dough of sorts, then already that is a problem of kneading on Shabbos, and that you can't do. So to add the water to the bran, you can, but to mix it together, you may not. And you cannot put water before bees. If you're raising bees, and apparently they need to drink water, you cannot put water in front of them, or you cannot put water in front of doves. Shabashevach. A shevach is a dovecot. Now, bees, dovecot. The bees and these doves, they can really take care of themselves. You don't got to give them water. They fly around. They find their water. They come back. You don't need to feed them water. And therefore, that's called a necessary effort. And that's also something that the sage just said we cannot do on Shabbos. But you can put water in front of geese and chickens, and in front of Herodian doves. Now, these doves or these animals that we just said, the geese, the chickens, and these types of doves, they are domesticated. They live by you. They rely on you for their food. They're not the kind of animals that can go out and find their own food. And therefore, then you can give them water. You got to feed them. You can do it on Shabbos. You got to feed the animals. But the difference between the animals, the flying animals that we mentioned before, and these, difference between the bees and the Herodian doves is because they fly around, they go out and around, and they can find their own water. And therefore, for you to give them water is considered a necessary effort. And they're called Herodian doves is because the king, Herod, raised these doves in his palace. They were not they were not wild. They were more of a domesticated type. And therefore, since they can, if you're raising those kinds of birds, those kinds of doves, they cannot find water on their own, and therefore you are permitted to give them water. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Actually, what you do